idea that other programs, people, organizations could take what we've done and adapt it and build on it for their purposes. So this is the overall table of contents. I'll zoom in a moment, but just to orient you to this 2025 report. Like I mentioned, the executive summary has a brief introduction and then also the big table of all the baseline GWP values. There's also, by the way, a spreadsheet which has that same information in Excel format that's downloadable at the same web page where the main report is. And then methods section, and I'll go into a few of the methods that really relate to using the baselines. And then the section 3, results by category, is that state of EPD snapshot. So that's really the vast majority of the report in terms of number of pages and content, is all those results by category. And then some appendices. I'll call out Appendix A. I'll talk about a bunch of the changes since the 2023 version, but that's a good place to look for a lot more detail about what's changed since the last version. So a few highlights of what's new in 2025. In terms of our process, we had a lot more stakeholder engagement. So that included reaching out to industry associations and manufacturers, sometimes by email, in some cases interviews, to really draw upon their domain expertise about particular material categories, and sometimes related to EPDs, sometimes about production processes. And I think that was a really helpful part of this year's process we had done that a little bit in the past, but we really expanded that to build connections and improve our content. We also had a user feedback survey roughly a year ago, which did not get a lot of responses, but some, and what we did get was very helpful in terms of what folks found useful or not useful from the 2023 version. We also had an independent methods review, so a handful of people with different areas of expertise: policy, engineering, design, construction, LCA. So a handful of people reviewed a draft of our methods and provided feedback. And then finally, building transparency, the organization that operates the EC3 tool, both in terms of we collected most of our EPD data from EC3, so we had coordination with them for that, but also trying to coordinate how to effectively implement the baselines into the EC3 tool, and we're actually working on that right now with them. Structure, I think just the main thing to highlight is that in the 2023 version, we had one kind of short report and then a big appendix document. And it's similar types of content now, but note that it's one document rather than two. So if I go back up here, what you see is section 3, the results by category. That was similar content as what were the appendices, the separate appendix document in 2023. And that's partly, we got some feedback that having it all in one place is helpful. So hopefully it is. In terms of methods, I'm going to go into more detail on these 4 bolded ones in just a moment. I won't describe them now, but some methods, both that changed methods and just more documentation and transparency about methods we already had. And then finally, content in terms of additional categories we looked at and new baseline values. Here's a little bit of a summary. So each item with a C means there's a category that we investigated this time around that we did not include in the 2023 version. And then the BL means there is a new or are new baseline values related to that category. So high strength threading mix, above 8,000 PSI, shotcrete, cement, et cetera, You can see the list. I'll leave it here for a moment. And we can come back to this. This is also a screenshot from Appendix A, so you can look at that more closely later. So I'm going to go into 4 topics that I think are maybe most significant that affect baseline's use. And actually, let me back up. Just I think Jacob said this at the outset, but I'm here to present my perspective on what I think will affect baseline's use, but also I'm really here to learn from this group. Uh, we work hard, we gather our information, we make our best guesses, we publish a report, and then sometimes we don't really know like what happens to it after that, how people are using it. So I'm appreciate and look forward to hearing input after I give this presentation. Okay, so one item is what we call parent versus child category baselines. So briefly, for this report, we try and categorize baseline product types, so the kind of groups of products for which we provide a baseline value. We try to categorize those by functional equivalence. So what, can be generally swappable for what in a given project application. And I think it's an important reminder that functional equivalence isn't inherent to a material or a product. It also depends on the particular application. So what does the project need? What are the specifications for that project? And so there's cases of some products where they may be functionally equivalent and they may not, depending on the application. So here we have an example of plywood and OSB, oriented strand board. Both can be used as wood sheathing. In many cases, you could use one or the other to meet the criteria of the project. But in some cases, you couldn't. In some cases, due to structural needs, you could only choose a product of one of those types. So in those cases of kind of overlapping function, CLF in some cases provided child and parent level product type baselines. So that when I say child, that means a baseline for plywood and a baseline for OSB. Here, I'll go to the next slide. And then also a baseline for wood sheathing. So that would be the parent category. And then we note that in the main table and in the category results that it's a parent category baseline. And so the idea, and we have not done this in the past, where I think we were more concerned with having kind of a one-to-one mapping of one product to one baseline. And now we introduced this concept where a product like a softwood plywood product could map to 2 different baselines. So the goal is to provide a bit more flexibility and options because different users and projects might have different needs, but we also understand that can create more work or potential confusion. Which baseline do I choose? So we have this chart with the idea that it can help provide some guidance of what cases would warrant using the child level baseline and what cases would warrant using the parent level baseline. So on the left, we see the 2 kind of main uses of the baselines that we see, a baseline as comparison point and as default GWP value. I'll go over the top here as an example. So if you have a project application where any or multiple child product types could fulfill that application. So you need wood sheathing on your building, and either OSB or plywood would suffice for sheathing. Then we would say it's appropriate to use the parent category baseline because multiple child product types could work. On the other hand, if there's something in the specification due to, say, some particular structural need that only one of them is appropriate to use, only products of only one child type, then it would make sense to use the child product type baseline. And there's kind of a similar flow related to when using baseline data as a default value in a model. And so this in some ways provides flexibility, including maybe in schematic design. There's a more broad set of options, and then as the project gets more defined, there might be a narrower set of options. And so the relevant baseline in that case might change as the project progresses. The next topic I'll talk about is user calculated baseline values. So as we try and classify products by functional equivalence, sometimes there are kind of discrete functions that products have within a category, and sometimes they exist on a range, and that could be a range of dimension, performance, or sometimes ingredient quantities, factors that affect both their function and the GWP. So I'll provide some examples. The first one on this list, ready mix concrete, we did have this in version 2023. So following the NRMCA regional benchmark report, we have baseline values for discrete concrete strengths. So 5,000 PSI, 6,000 PSI. We have a baseline for 5,000, a baseline for 6,000. And guidance to use linear interpolation for cases where there's a mix between those. So if you had a mix at 5,600 PSI, you could use linear interpolation to estimate or calculate a baseline value for that particular mix. You don't have to just use the 5,000 or the 6,000, but get one that's really accurate to that mix. So we did have that, and the others here on this list are new for 2025. Some examples were so an insulated metal panel. That's this image here on the right. They can come in a range of thicknesses. You know, it's a sandwich product with a metal skin on each side and then a insulation in the middle. And so instead of having a baseline value for every possible thickness, we provide a calculation method that I'll show on the next slide, an equation with constants and a variable to plug in your particular value for the thickness to get a baseline value for that particular panel thickness. Similar for PVC roofing membrane, an equation for given membrane thickness. Wood eye joists, their declared unit is in a linear meter, so wood eye joists of different depths or cross sections are going to have different function and different global warming potential, so a way to calculate based on a given cross section. And then asphalt mixtures, we follow the NAPA EPD benchmark report. NAPA's National Asphalt Pavement Association, and they have a really great benchmark report with a user calculated process that takes into account location and the particular mix design specified often by the DOT. So an example here, this is a screenshot from the report for the insulated metal panel. You see the equation, this B equals 4184. So the 4184, this constant value is the metal skin, because no matter how thick the panel is, the metal skin is the same amount of metal. So there's a constant value for that, but then the insulation varies depending on panel thickness. So that's the 2332 would be the insulation GWP per inch, and then you plug in your inches. That's T thickness for in inches. I recognize that most of our units are metric. Sometimes we try and kind of match what industry standards are. So in the United States, panels are sold by inches. So here's an example where we do have a few discrete baselines for insulated metal panel for discrete thicknesses, but also we provide this to give more flexibility for panels of any thickness. And I do want to kind of send out an appreciation to the Metal Construction Association. Someone from there supplied that disaggregated data, the separate data for the metal panel, the metal skin and the insulation, so that we could provide this equation. Let's see, so number 3, third topic is product types that don't align with EC3 categories or filters. So in most cases, our product types do align in the sense that you could select a category in EC3 and select certain filters, and the kind of definition of products that you'd be searching for would align one-to-one with the our product type that we designate here in the baselines report. Then there are some cases, though, where that's not the case. So for example, here we see two examples of concrete masonry unit, CMU. Lightweight CMU uses some sort of lightweight aggregate in some locations. Natural lightweight aggregates like pumice are available, and manufacturers will use those. In other cases where those are not available, they'll use manufactured lightweight aggregate like expanded shale, for instance. And as you can, so these are, will serve the same, they perform the same way, the CMU, but you can see the baseline values dramatically different based on the different aggregate. And this, by the way, the product types here and the baseline values are based on the industry average EPD, the CMHA, Concrete Masonry Hardscape Association industry EPD. But unfortunately, in EC3, at least right now, there is no filter option for aggregate type. So you couldn't right now in EC3 search for lightweight CMU with manufactured aggregate. You could just search for lightweight CMU, and you'd have to like go into the individual EPD and grab that information. So EC3 is also an evolving tool. So we share this feedback and are constantly working to improve their category definition and filters for items like this. But just a heads up. And then the last topic I'll mention is our data QA intensity. So in our data set that we used, we had tens of thousands of digitized EPDs. We want that digital EPD data to match the original EPDs as well as it can. The original EPDs, and for most categories, are PDFs. And we're mostly getting our data from EC3. So EC3 does this massive job of taking PDFs of all different formats and trying to convert that into a digital data that is machine readable and human readable. And it's without that, our report would be a lot different. We couldn't really do anything like what we do right now. And EC3 isn't able to capture everything. So in our process of QA, we want to try and confirm as much as we can that the digital EPD data aligns with the original EPDs. And so we check. We use some scripted processes and a good deal of manual checking. But of course, we couldn't possibly look at every EPD, with tens of thousands of EPDs. So we have to choose where we spend, I say, our QA budget. If we have some number of hours we're going to spend reviewing EPDs, we have to decide how we're going to spend those hours. So I don't necessarily expect you to read this, but I'll just say, the first priority of how we decide is about the EPD, the product EPD data significance. And when I say product EPD, that's our term for, might be called manufacturer-specific EPDs. So EPDs that are made by one company as opposed to an industry EPD. So we saw two major cases where the product EPD data was really significant, and significant meaning we really wanted to get it right where we could, prioritize getting it right. And so one is for product types that are major focus and buy clean policies. I'll note that, we wrote this sometime in the fall when the buy clean landscape was a lot different than it is now, but acknowledging that. And then also were cases where we'd be using the product EPD data to set a baseline value. So many of our baseline values are based on already published industry-wide data, like especially industry average EPDs. And in those cases, we're relying on the work of of experts and industry organizations that have done that work. But in cases where there is not published industry-wide data, like an industry average EPD, and we're looking at the collection of product EPDs and aggregating those and doing our own math of taking an average of that data, then that's a case where we want to have more confidence in our data set, that the digital EPD data set matches reality, the actual original EPDs. So between product EPD data significance and then also the size of the data set, we had a somewhat arbitrary cutoff of 20 EPDs. So in cases where there were high product EPD data significance and not very many EPDs, it was realistic to look at every single EPD in the data set for that product type. In cases where there's high EPD data significance, but a lot of EPDs, we would look at some sample. We'd manually look at a sample, usually starting with the lowest and highest GWP, and a handful of other types of attributes that kind of we use to sort which ones to look at first. And then in other cases, the QA intensity was low, where that means we did kind of just a basic cleaning and filtering. And so theoretically, this might not affect baseline's use, but when you look at our state of EPD data, each of these blue dots, for instance, is a product EPD data point in our data set in the top chart. And then we have these GWB percentiles. So the minimum, the maximum, and the 20th, 40th, 50th, 60th, 80th percentiles and the mean. These statistics are based on our product EPD data set. And so if someone was to use these statistics, like we want our project to have rebar that is, at the 40th percentile or better, we CLF want to acknowledge that in some cases we're pretty confident about the number you see here, and in other cases we're less confident. That's just the reality of the data. So at the bottom here, I'll zoom in. We mentioned for each of these category results sections, we mentioned what the QA intensity of that category was, with just a basic low, medium, high, to at least give a little sense to the reader our confidence in the data set. And that is my presentation, and I am happy to look more closely at any of the items I already mentioned, or I can open up the report and we can zoom in to anything else. And so I'm very happy to answer questions, and also very excited to hear more from you all about your use of the baselines in the past, how you use it, what's been helpful, what's not. And thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. That was a great, I guess, kind of skim of the report, but definitely a great dive into helping us kind of understand what's in it. And maybe a question just for the group right now before we maybe open it up is, how many people currently use this or use the previous version of this report to kind of help put together either co-building LCAs or understand maybe baselines for different products? And maybe a virtual hand would be helpful just to kind of gauge. Looks like a good amount of folks. Cool. So with that, I guess maybe I'll open it up to questions for everybody to see if anyone has any questions for Brooke, and maybe anyone wants to make any comments on how they use the report for their baselines before maybe we jump in and add any other commentary. Eli, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I had been using the EC3 tool as kind of like a search location to find when I needed a new industry-wide EPD for a product. It sounds like I should probably be using this tool, or really, I'm sorry, this publication, um, just so that I'm clear. So there's industry-wide EPDs reported here, and then also some that are reported as um, product values, and those product values are generally the instances where there's not an industry-wide, and so the CLF has like aggregated from the product data available. Is that correct?
Yeah, great question. So we got a couple of parts. So our the CLF baseline is kind of it's our estimate of an industry average GWP value. And in many cases, we're copying and pasting an industry average EPD's result because someone has already done that LCA work, an industry association, an LCA professional, to say, um, here, this is maybe a longer-winded answer to a simple question, but so this, I realize you might not see too well, but there's this orange diamond shape. So that's the industry average EPD value for rebar. And then this red star, we're saying, okay, we're going to match that because that is so the CLF baseline in this case equals the industry average EPD value. For a product type where there is no industry average EPD, then yes, we're taking the collection of product EPDs, in this case, the blue dots, and we would perform an average. In some cases, a weighted average when we have production volume data, which unfortunately most of the time is not the case. So then it would be a unweighted or straight average, and we document that. So that's the answer to your second question. In terms of looking at EC3 versus looking here, I'll say that we mean this report to be a static complement to a dynamic tool like EC3. So EC3 is able to bring in new EPDs all the time. It's able to filter out expired EPDs. You can kind of search for your particular needs. So in EC3's search will depend on when you're searching and your particular filters. Whereas we have a static report that the benefit is we've done all that QA work and we have all these industry average values in one place that you could look up. But also EC3 might, if 6 months from now there's a new industry average EPD, obviously it's not going to like appear in our static report, but it would hopefully be in EC3. Did I address those questions? Great.
I think that's great context.
Brooke, I had maybe a question here too. Is there ever a case where the industry average EPD is not chosen as the average, or do you guys also maybe in this case with rebar, right, calculate what the average value is from all the industry, not the industry, but all those product specific EPDs, and kind of compare that to what is being reported with the industry average, just to kind of maybe understand if there is a difference?
Yes. Well, first of all, there's often a difference for sure. And I think we have our hypotheses of what the difference is. So if you just look at this chart, so um, is this big enough to see? I'm not sure if it's big enough to see, but the industry average EPD value for fabricated rebar is 854 kilograms CO2. And then I see the mean of the product EPDs is 795. So different, not like drastically different, but different. And in some cases, It is drastically different, I'll say. So your first question, do we ever like not choose the industry average EPD? Yes, but it's rare. So we're looking for we're assuming they're accurate and appropriate and representative unless there's some red flag. And so usually that's the case has been when the scope doesn't really align, like the scope is too broad. So for instance, uh, insulated metal panels, before we had this kind of more disaggregated information from that industry association, the insulated metal panel APD just has one value. Here's the average GWP for insulated metal panel. But insulated metal panel, if a 2-inch metal panel compared to an 8-inch metal panel is like a difference of probably like 3 times. So it's not a very representative value. So in 2023, we just didn't have a baseline for insulated metal panel because it was it was not representative enough. It was not specific enough to be useful in our estimation. So so that was an example where previously we did not use an industry average EPD to set a baseline value. And then your question about like how when there is an industry average EPD, how does the product EPD data align? So I think sometimes it's not necessarily the same manufacturer submitting data. Sometimes the industry average EPD is a lot newer or a lot older than the product EP data. So there's any number of reasons why they might not align as we might think, like why that orange diamond might not be right in the middle of the set of blue dots.
Great, thank you.
I have a question. So this is great work. I do apologize. I came in a little bit late, so you might have already addressed this, but is there a cadence that CLF is anticipating updating these baseline numbers since the data does vary, is going to be changing over time, hopefully?
Yes. So historically, it's been roughly every 2 years, and our plan at this point, plans change, of course, but is to continue that approximate cadence. And we did include I'll mention, you said that they change over time. We did include an appendix that has a comparison of this year's values compared to the previous report's values. Because many of the baseline values are based on industry average EPDs, which typically have a lifespan of 5 years, a lot of times we don't see changes in the baseline values in a 2-year increment.
Yeah.
But we'll see changes to the product EPD data there. And then, so for example, the way the cadence of the insulation PCR is at a shift. So a lot of the, like right now it's being updated. So a lot of the insulation industry average EPDs were recently updated. So like for insulation, there's a lot of new baselines, for instance, compared to 2023. Ready mix, there has not been a new industry average EPD or benchmark report. So our ready mix, at least besides high strength ready mix, our baselines are the same as 2 years ago because we're using the same NRMCA benchmark report. I think I answered your question, but let me know if I missed something.
No, you did. Because I think what I'm thinking of, I just came off a meeting this week where I'm on the sustainability committee for SEI, Structural Engineers Institute, and they're developing a standard for LCAs and stuff. Right now it's in the pre-standard phase and we're trying to identify like what the next iteration advanced scope. And part of me is used to like the ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G, where you have some default values to use as placeholders or kind of baseline numbers. And it's always nice to not reinvent the wheel. So I was like, oh, that could be potentially something that SEI could be pointing to this document, especially if you're updating it. Understanding like industry has to feed the information into it. But for baseline purposes, I feel like that should be sufficient for the work that needs to be done. The other thing I was going to throw out there too was I feel like I should know most of this stuff, and yet I still struggle on understanding some of the scope of individual products. So, and then like going through and explaining it to people who aren't as familiar with like their subject matter. So for instance, just rebar fabricated, rebar unfabricated. I don't think I've seen anything that shows descriptions of what each of the materials is, just so that people can understand, oh, am I in the right category and using the right information? I'm curious both to CLF folks, but then also to others on the call. Is this something that is not just a me thing? And as others, like, is there a need for that, I think? And I only say that just because I'm a structural engineer. I look at structural engineering LCAs that others do, and sometimes it's all over the place, and I realize they don't know structural engineer terminology.
Yeah, I'm switching my screens. So we try to address this. Actually, first I want to respond to your previous item about things changing over time. I think part of our, or not, I think part of our reason to really try and be transparent about our methodology is that if there's new industry average EPD, for instance, published 6 months from now, I guess we empower organizations not to like be beholden to our report. I mean, we're like honored that people look at our report as a valuable resource, but like take our methods and say, okay, yes, this industry average EPD meets these criteria. We can use this as a baseline value because yes, things will clearly change in the next 2 years. We try in each section of our category results to like provide a description of what is and isn't included in the product type as we define it. And there's for fabrication, we have like multiple pages of description above this because I probably shouldn't have even showed. Now I might not choose that slide in the future because I don't even want to bring up fabrication because it's a funky way that the steel EPDs
Oh
are
no, this
treated
is
and
good
have.
though. I somehow missed this, so this is great. And so this is, I guess I've just mainly gone to the spreadsheet, so I need to dig into the report some more. This is great.
Yeah, so you might be able to see my
Mhm. The bookmarks, yeah.
so that's if I go into steel, and go to each in the results by category, I'll see a description. In each of, within steel will be rebar, plate, cold form framing, et cetera, et cetera. And there'll be descriptions of each of those.
Okay.
Brooke, there's a question in the chat about high strength concrete.
Can someone read it? Well, I can find the chat actually.
I can read it.
Okay, I'll read it out loud.
Oh, okay.
Any thoughts on using interpolation to estimate baseline values above the NRMC 8,000 PSI strength? NRMC has provided us with an approach for estimating these values through 12,000 PSI, but it'd be great if CLF also provided these so the baselines could be used in LCA tools. Okay, well, good news for you, or I don't know if it's good news, but we do have baseline values for where there was sufficient data, so not in all geographies, for 9,000, 10,000, and 12,000 PSI mixes. We'll just go there. Get this out of the way. There's a lot to scroll through, pardon. So here's an example. The orange diamonds are baseline values based on the industry average EPD, or in this case, benchmark report. So these are the standard strengths you're familiar with for under MCA. And then 9,000, 10,000, 12,000, these red asterisks are the baseline values that CLF has calculated by taking the average of the available EPDs. So you can see for Pacific Northwest, 10,000 PSI, we see relatively a lot of blue dots. There's a lot of documentation in there about why we think that set of EPDs is representative enough of the industry to set a baseline value. And so for some regions and for some strengths, we do have baseline values for high strength concrete. The question about linear interpolation. So I think it still makes sense between 9,000 and 10,000 and 10,000 and 12,000, although we recommend not doing it between 8,000 and 9,000 because there's this, we acknowledge a jump in methods, like a shift in methods. So in one case, for 2,500 to 8,000, we're using the NRMCA benchmark report, and then we're shifting methods to using our own math for the others. And we acknowledge that, you know, those might not align in the way we wish they could. Let me know if that, Scott, if you have follow-up questions or if I didn't answer.
So I have maybe a follow-up question. I don't think it's to you, Brooke, particularly, but maybe to the group. Is in this particular instance, say, you know, we have your product has a 10,000 psi, you know, concrete section of the building, but there's no industry average EPD to reference, and you don't have a specific product or product-specific EPD to reference either during your, you know, the design process. In my mind, you kind of choose the best representative EPD available, and then maybe there's some kind of multiplier that you use to kind of, you know, equal the, you know, this CLF baseline to kind of get yourself there. But I don't know what anyone else is doing in those particular instances where you don't find an industry average to kind of understand maybe your design impact.
Yeah, well, I'll say a couple things, and then I'd be curious to hear more from the group. So one thing we noticed is that there's this drop between when you get up higher, the in strength, the GWP doesn't just continue to climb, as you can see, at least in these examples. And so that might be a difference in methods, but also it's sometimes my understanding is the other two people on our team, Jordan and Rochelle, are more the concrete experts than I am, but that because the cure times, you don't necessarily need more Portland cement in that mix. And so indeed, it doesn't necessarily steadily climb the higher strength you go. That is, the GWP doesn't necessarily climb at the same rate as the strength. I had another thought or question, but I forgot it. So I'll stop there and be curious to hear what other people say about that.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Like basically once you get into those really high strain situations, you're usually looking at areas that have longer curing durations that you can allow for, which is why it kind of makes sense that it tapers off. So yeah, I was actually wondering the same question that Scott had. But that linear interpolation then, so you're saying like that's between two, like the two closest, if you were to do like a 9,500 PSI, for example, you would look at the two closest and average them, or are you creating like a single, well, try like best fit curve between all of the mixes?
We recommend it, and we provide an equation that's the two closest. And so that would
yeah,
be
that's what we've done, I think, historically.
45. Yeah, you're right between those. Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm going to respond to these precast concrete questions because it also corresponds to a previous question about industry average GPTs. So the PCI, yeah, we've discussed with them. No, the short answer is no. We don't have baselines for precast concrete. The main reason is that those industry average EPDs, similar to my description of the insulated metal panels, are really broad, and they're great for a very rough order of magnitude. But in terms of using in like a policy or specification, their average values are like for all structural precast concrete, which, you know, there's a huge range in the amount of reinforcement and the amount of cement that can that really affects both function and GWP. So, and I know they are working on an update that will have more kind of nuance accounting and reporting that can address those things. So we look forward to that. Oh, I see there's some other things in the chat. Anything else?
If anyone else
I
has
had
any
a-
other questions besides, go ahead. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
had a, thank you. I had a question earlier about just your PDF reading software. Like I think you mentioned you have to manually QC them. I thought, we have this amazing technology that just read the PDFs and it's accurate and that's it. It's done by software. Is that not the case?
Well, first of all, CLF does not use software to read PDFs. EC3 does that. Building Transparency does that through the EC3 tool. And, compared to starting with a PDF, it's like 90+% reliable, I would say. Like the EC3 is able to extract a lot of the data accurately, but they can't do it all, and they can't do it all accurately, mostly because that's just the nature of like all these PDFs in different formats and different layouts, and different terminology that they use. So I think, if we reach really upstream, it's about TCRs kind of aligning in organization and terminology, and ideally producing digital EPDs from the start. But given the state of things, EC3 is able to get most of that information, and then we see it as our job to, where we can, fill in gaps. And then we're trying to also provide that information back to Building Transparency so they can update their database with what we find. So does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. I guess since there's one, does anyone know what's happening at the EPA with EPDs and product category rules? Crickets, right? Okay. Okay. Well, we'll wait.
Not at the EPA, but other organizations are trying to kind of pick up the torch.
Good. That's good. Thank you for taking that.
Hi, Priya here. I have a question around the finishes section specifically. So I've been working on ILFI zero carbon certification for interior projects. And one of the methods which ILFI suggests is for interior specifically is proposing or optimizing the products by comparing it with the baseline and then choosing a product which is below the baseline. And we've always had issues finding products below the baseline, especially for high CAC ceiling tiles or something like that. And I know you did mention about the parent category and the overall aspect around that. Are you all planning to have that parent category for finishes and then subcategories under that as well? Because we've seen that the numbers really fluctuate a lot, and currently we are pretty much using EC3 and then taking snippets of that from a time period and then considering those as baseline. So it's been very difficult for us because, as you mentioned, EC3 is dynamic and keeps moving. And so I was really curious, especially I'm happy that there are more baselines this time in 2025, but wanted to know more, like, is that something upcoming, or how are you all planning to do those finishes aspects of baselines?
Yeah, okay. I don't really have like a one single uniform answer, but I can say, like for ceiling tile, for instance, based on discussion with manufacturers, we divided it up into 3 buckets based on the NRC value to try and be more, representative and of different functional categories that relate to GWP. So I would hope that is more useful. There's others like carpet, which I think is still a big gap. Just the way that carpet EPDs currently provide data. We did not publish baselines for carpet. So it's kind of like a, I don't have the uniform answer. Like I said, it's kind of category by category. I see we're at time, but yeah, I guess to you and to anyone, if I didn't totally answer your question, you can certainly feel free to email me and I'll follow up. I'll put my email on the chat.
Yeah, no issues. I believe that's something, an ongoing conversation, and would love to know more about that. So thank you so much for the answer.
No.
Well, I think that's it. Like Brooke said, that's time, but this is a really great discussion. And Brooke, thank you again for presenting this. And I know everybody on this call definitely appreciates all the work that CLF does to put out these reports. They're super helpful to all the users. So I just wanted to say thank you there. And we'll have another meeting in, I guess it's 2 months. Topic to be determined. But thank you all again for joining and look forward to the next one.